Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It's the 12th of June, 2013, and Larry Ferlazzo is our guest again. Larry, thanks so much for coming back.
Well, it's great being here. Thanks for the invitation. Glad people were saying that their students could use some self-motivation. This gave me a little self-motivation. I'm sort of crawling to the finish line of the end of our school year tomorrow, so this is good.
Oh, well, then that's a real sacrifice for you to be on the show. It's most appreciated.
No sacrifice at all.
So the Future of Education is a Web 2.0 Labs project. We had the School Leadership Summit in March. All of those recordings are up and free at schoolleadershipsummit.com. Coming up this month in San Antonio, if you're going to ISTE, we have the all-day unconference the day before ISTE called Hack Education this year. And then we have a series of events called ISTE Unplugged. Go to ISTEUnplugged.com for more information. Lots of free fun. Can't wait to see many of you there. We have a STEM conference coming in September. It's called STEM X. The X is the variable for everything else. Like the other large, massive global conferences, these are practitioner-led, peer-to-peer learning opportunities. This should be a lot of fun. 3 days all around STEM and STEM-related topics. Then in October, the Future of Libraries Conference, Library 2.013, and in November, the 5-day, always exciting Global Education Conference. If you would like to join us in the future, we have several good shows coming up. Matt Hearn comes on July 2nd. There is a little bit of a break between now and post-ISTE. Will Richardson then comes on to talk about his small book, Why School. Don Winkle on student entrepreneurship and the real flipped learning. That will be fun. David Marshak is going to talk about self-design. And then in September, Doug Johnson on the indispensable librarian. There will be others in between there, but we're still working on dates for some other shows. Lots of fun. And Peggy's always complimentary. Peggy, you live that principle of appreciative inquiry or just positive feedback. Larry talks about it in the book, and you're a great example of that. If you've missed any of our shows, they're all recorded in full Blackboard Collaborate form and in MP3 versions. Ben Rhymes came on to talk about virtual book clubs. Are they what we had hoped they would be, and how are people doing them? It was a fun show. Doug Lemov and Dan Willingham came on to talk about their new books. Peter Gray on Free to Learn. We're actually going to mention Peter in tonight's show. John Hunter on his World Peace and Other Fourth Grade Achievements. I actually got to spend a half a day with John in North Carolina a couple of weeks ago. And like Larry, just somebody who sort of authentically is interested in other people. And Larry actually made that connection as I was reading the book. I thought it's really fun to meet people that you know care about other people.
I certainly agree on that, and excuse me. It's
well, that's you. It's not an easy way to respond to that, is there? So if you'd like to indicate where you're listening from, those of you in the live studio audience, look for the star to the left of the map. It's the second icon down. There's a little set of icons to the left of the map. You're looking for the star. You click on it twice, and then you click on the map. You can probably hear I have a slight cold, but I am back in Park City, Utah, where it's been warm, but not nearly as oppressively warm as Phoenix, Arizona, or Sacramento, California. Feel free to put a note in the chat. Let us know where you are, time, temperature, anything else that you think is valuable to know. And you can keep doing that as we move forward, but I am going to move the slide forward. There is a Mighty Bell space for today's show. I will give you the link in the chat. Mighty Bell is a content and curation program started by Gina Bianchini, who was the creator of Ning. I have done consulting work for them. It is in the past, but it's worth noting. I do really like the concept and the program, and so we've collected some resources about Larry in that Mighty Bell space, and you're welcome to add to them and keep conversation going there afterwards. So Larry, this is the second book in what I now know is a trilogy. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how you've mapped that out?
Well, I guess I couldn't. I wish I could say it was a pre-planned, logically designed trilogy, but it has not been. It was, but it's basically adding new concepts as I try them out in the classroom and as I learn more about them, and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work. And certainly over the past few years, this idea of developing intrinsic motivation has been popularized even more, and there's been a lot more research into it. Certainly Daniel Pink and his book Drive, helped jumpstart that interest. But I think that through 3 books, I anticipate covering at least the major concepts in the classroom that I have faced, the major challenges that I have faced over the past 10 years, and seeing how to implement the idea of developing intrinsic motivation in students in all those major challenge areas.
So you, at the beginning of the book, or I think it's at the beginning, you talk about the importance, the new understanding we have of the importance of the adolescent period in someone's life. How does that relate to intrinsic motivation?
Well, Dr. James Heckman, who's has certainly been in the news lately as with the announcement by President Obama wanting to start preschool for everyone, and which is what Dr. Heckman is primarily known for. That he's done a lot of research, and he's known primarily for the research that has shown the importance of preschool education over the long term for people. What his research shows that is a little less known is that he's identified basically 2 areas where a lot of the primary qualities of what we look at as social and emotional learning, this idea of developing grit, persistence, self-control, that there are 2 times in people's lives when they tend to be generally open to this idea and can make the most major strides in improvement. One of those is during the preschool years. And that's, again, what he's particularly known for. But the other area, the other time that he's identified when people are most open to this is during adolescence. Does not mean that that people are closed during other times and that they cannot develop persistence or self-control during other times in their lives, but those are the times when you can get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak.
So you talk about all students being intrinsically motivated. I actually wondered about that, right? You said it may just be that they're not motivated in the areas we want them to be. But I sometimes worry that part of what schooling does to students is it actually removes motivation, that they don't have a confidence in their ability to do much of anything. How does that kind of play into your sense that there is some intrinsic motivation somewhere?
Well, in addition to research, it also comes out of my community organizing experience. And I was a community organizer for 19 years prior to becoming a classroom teacher 10 years ago. Our perspective is, everyone is interested in something. It just may not be something that we want them to be interested in. And they may not be interested in doing it exactly the way that we want them to do it in, but that everyone is interested in something. I mean, a story that I tell, a perfect example is a student of mine a year or 2 ago. We were working on on writing persuasive essays, and the topic was writing an essay about what is the most challenging natural disaster that people have been researching natural disasters. And he did not want to do that, and actually he has a long multi-year history, going to your question, of not being very motivated academically. One of the key elements of helping students develop more intrinsic motivation is building relationships, knowing what students are genuinely interested in, and being able to connect to that. I know, based on my conversations with him, I knew he was a sports fan, and I said, well, I know you're a football fan. Write a persuasive essay, and what's your favorite team? Okay, Raiders. Write a persuasive essay about why the Raiders are the best football team around. The issue wasn't, I didn't really care if he wrote that focused on natural disasters, if the main focus of the lesson was to learn how to write a persuasive essay. And I think, and he ended up writing a persuasive essay. He said, well, wow, I could do that. He did that, and then actually asked if he could write another one to get extra credit for all the other assignments he hadn't done. Coincidentally, the next week, we had a student study team meeting scheduled with all of his teachers and his mother. He was able to show the essay, 2 essays, to his mother, and his mother started crying. She had never seen him write an essay before. But I think the key is, yeah, I mean, if we are flexible and and are attuned to students' self-interests, we're able to more concretely connect those to what we want to teach in the classroom. As long as we keep our eyes on the prize, so to speak. I mean, but certainly that flexibility is often not there in the classroom.
You've used the words interest and motivation somewhat interchangeably there, but I want to suggest that you're actually doing something really important and valuable as you move someone from intrinsic interest to motivation. And maybe that's why I kind of hesitated, which is what I think you did for that student, and when it comes through so clearly in the book, is that you encourage the capacity of the individual. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a huge number of students who leave school feeling like they don't have that capacity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, oftentimes in our schools, the standardization of both testing and lessons do not leave time, or it's not perceived as leaving time for trying to help students develop that inner capacity. It's more, let's get through the chapters, let's get through the lessons, and whether it's connected to students' lives and their vision or not.
For me, at core in the book is the respect that you have for the student. And we've come back to this several times in the last few interviews. But that respect for the student comes from a place of believing how you treat others, right, and how you see and treat others. Is this the difference between Skinnerism, behaviorism, and agency? Is it the recognition of the individual potential? Is that too simplified a way of putting it?
No, I mean, I think that's a good description, and I think also it's not just an either or kind of situation. I mean, certainly there are oftentimes when I have to, when I use extrinsic motivation, right? I mean, there are times when, if a student is just, out of control and disruptive, I have certainly used bribery sometimes in the past. If Sometimes extrinsic motivation can be used to introduce people or students to new concepts or new authors. But the issue is, which side do you tend to be on? Do you tend to be on the side of bribery, or offering conditioning, or do you tend to be on the side of what Sir Ken Robinson's talked about, creating the conditions, like a farmer, they're creating the conditions for growth. You can't beat a crop into growing, but you can create those conditions. And we're also all human, right? And a lot of our students face lots of challenges. Our school's 100%. It's 100% free lunch, free breakfast, and actually free supper. We got a lot of students that face lots of challenges, and I don't try to say that I am 100% on the intrinsic motivation side of it, but I think I try to be there the vast majority of the time.
I really like the word you've just used, the phrase creating the conditions, because it feels to me that sort of inherent in our behaviorist views, from marketing to politics, is this sense of sort of going instantly to the end result. And I get the impression, I think you even mentioned in the book, that your community organizing sort of taught you that you can't actually do that. It doesn't work long term to try and mandate the results. Mm-hmm. You try and create the conditions for people to be able to achieve.
Yes, and that means, sometimes, achievement doesn't play out exactly the way you want it to be. In organizing, one of the major reasons for our success is the focus was on developing relationships and developing leadership, getting people to share stories and then help them develop a different interpretation of those stories that move them towards action. And it's always a challenge of trying to integrate that with the pressures of sticking with the curriculum and getting through the chapters and getting students ready for the standardized tests. But we got to recognize that there is that tension. I think one of the problems is oftentimes our school leadership does not recognize that as a tension. They view the operant conditioning side of things as the way to get things done.
So I know that for me, I actually had to go through a shift in my own perspective. And not being a teacher in the classroom, it was with my own children, where I realized that control wasn't working. It worked up to a certain age, and then all of a sudden the results were worse were much worse than they had been. And I had to kind of rethink my life in terms of how I interacted with others. For you, was that the community organizing? Is there a particular time when you felt like you had to go through that shift, or did you just sort of naturally understand this sort of as a person?
Oh no, clearly, as an organizer, it was a entirely new way of looking at things. The story that I often tell is actually sort of a time prior to becoming an organizer. I spent several years in working with what's called the Catholic Worker Movement, which is a group of folks who have soup kitchens and emergency shelters around the country and combine that work with social justice work. And one day, so we had a soup kitchen in an emergency shelter on Skid Row in San Jose, and one day I was out in front and I was sweeping the front step, around all these guys who were passed out drunk on our step, and a police officer pulled up in front of us, in front of the house, and started yelling at me because, you know, we were very well-intentioned but didn't really know what we were doing, and certainly neighbors were unhappy with us. And he was saying how we need to get more control of the place, and then one of the guys who was passed out drunk sort of pulled himself up on the banister and yelled at the officer, "Officer, Larry tries. He tries hard. You know, we just don't listen to him." And I think this, I reflect on that a lot because I view it as a difference. Well, do I want to be right, you know, in terms of, you know, getting people to do what I want them to do, or getting them to believe what I want them to believe, and lead with my mouth, or do I want to be effective and lead with my ears? So I think, for example, going back to that story about the student writing the essay, I wanted to be right. I would have said, man, you need to write this essay about what natural disaster is the worst natural disaster. That's the assignment. Do it. Or I want to be effective and be more flexible, and be relational, and keep my eye on the prize. What really is the major focus of what I want to accomplish? It's, in some ways, it's different. There's been a lot of research about the difference between being authoritative and being authoritarian. And being authoritarian typically means using power unilaterally and for control, no explanation given, and you demand obedience. Or, being authoritative means demonstrating strong control, but doing it relationally by listening and explaining. And there have been tons of studies for parenting styles, and I've tried to do this in my own parenting style, that show that parents that are more authoritative were viewed as a little more legitimate by their kids. And as a result, were less likely to act out or, quote-unquote, show delinquent behavior. And the opposite is true for authoritarian parents. The more authoritarian you are, the more likely your kid is to act out. And I think the same thing holds true in the classroom. We just got to keep on, and clearly, and as Gene says, too many teachers play the authoritarian, and we end up having the consequences. Am I authoritarian sometimes? Yes, right. I mean, we're all human. Today, during a final, was I authoritarian and threw a kid outside for a while to cool off? Yes. Because we are human. But again, do we tend to be authoritative, or do we tend to be authoritarian? So looking at where do we tend to be?
The great measure of this book's success for me was, as I read all of the lesson plans and ideas, I wanted to do them with my own children. There is another theme, and I want to get to some of those and let people hear a little bit of the meat of the material. But there was another theme throughout the book that I wanted to make sure I touched on with you in particular, which is, and I think we've talked about this before, but there is a pervasive sense of your actions, or the ones you take or the ones you recommend, being generative, meaning sort of explaining them and giving them as tools for the students to use themselves, not just something that a technique you're using on them.
Well, I think, that's critical both for long-term ownership on their part, and, I also think it's critical for the other things in the lessons that, or in the books and the lessons that we do at our school. It's, we're also interested in using those, in addition to helping students become motivated and develop the qualities of grit and perseverance and self-control. We want them to read challenging texts, develop writing skills, and you can't, and in order to do that, students have to understand the material. You know, this stuff isn't just coming out of, you know, my big head. And as my students will regularly attest, I wear an extra large hat, but it does come from, you know, from lots of research and challenging texts that students will read and need to read and need to interpret. And then subsequently teach it to other students. I mean, next year what we're doing is 11th graders are not only learning some of these newer lessons, but they then in turn will be coming in and teaching our ninth grade students the lessons that they have learned.
So we'll get back to some of the metacognitive, deeper thinking in a minute, but why don't we give people a little taste of kind of how you've organized the book. You have strategies that you brought from helping students motivate themselves, the first book, plus some new ones, right? And then each chapter is set up in such a way as to help somebody deal with something in the moment, and then to have kind of long-term lesson planning material as well. Do you want to describe the structure of each chapter?
Yeah, a lot, and I think that's a good summary. I think you know, it's basically, I think, you know, 7 or 8 questions, you know, ranging from how do you motivate students, how do you handle rudeness in class, how can you help students develop higher order thinking skills, how do you get them more interested in reading and writing, you know, how do you prepare them in an ethical way for standardized tests. And most of those topics are new. Some of them, as you say, are similar to the questions that were asked in the first book, Helping Students Motivate Themselves, but cover a lot of research that has come out since that first book and add new lessons teaching those topics. And, you know, as you say, there are each chapter has immediate, you know, what do you do like right now or tomorrow in dealing with some of these challenges, and then what are some lesson plans that you can do that would take a period or two involving all the students.
Yeah, a period or two or several weeks. I kept looking at it and thinking, oh, I would love to do this. How could you do all of these?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and what we do is generally try to do one a week over the course of a year, you know, and are able to do that and integrate it into our English curriculum, at least, fairly easily. You know, one a year, one a week, one every 10 days, that kind of thing. So, you know, and some of the lessons are more naturally towards the beginning of the year when you talk about, you know, what is the value behind learning how to read or write better, you know, and challenging students to look at what are some times that would serve their interests to be able to read and write. And then again, something that a student, you know, that a teacher can apply, you know, tomorrow when a student is acting out in class. And again, you know, reflecting the research and the actual experience in the classroom. I mean, all these lessons have been done multiple times in multiple classes, and certainly differ from their original, the original lesson based on what happened.
There's a lesson I think you left out.
Oh, okay.
That's pretty cheeky of me, isn't it?
That's fine.
It's personal curation. I think you live this lesson, this ability to kind of use the tools of technology to accumulate lots of interesting material around things that you're interested in. And I see this as being something really valuable for students in developing their own set of personal interests and sense of expertise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, actually, one of the things that we've started doing this year is not not on the technology side of things, but students, we have a special notebook that students curate what they view as the most important aspects of what we call life skill lessons. And then out of these notebooks, are able to do regular reflection on them and do regular work on them. And actually next year, one of our plans is to try to more integrate technology into some of these. Certainly, there's plenty of examples of supplemental technology, ways to supplement these lessons with technology. But we're talking about next year trying to be a little more innovative in figuring out how students can get some value-added benefit to it by using technology.
I use Evernote for that, and I feel it represents a really significant shift in my own ability to gather and then kind of focus on specific topic areas through the curating of the resources. Okay.
Oh yeah, I mean that'd be great. One of the challenges that at least our school faces is technology as well. We have very limited, very limited technology access at our schools, and at our school at least, and I think a lot of other schools, and being able to integrate it more on a regular basis it's just a challenge hardware wise. So, but we hope over the next few years that to change a little bit.
Larry, one of your strategies is choice and ownership. Mm-hmm. And Peter Gray came on the show a couple of weeks ago, wrote a book called Free to Learn, and talked about students having less control over their own lives than those in prison. A lot of what you do is around choice and ownership, but it's within sort of the confines or the constraints of kind of highly structured, age-banded cohorts. How do you find a balance there between the kind of freedom that I think Peter's talking about and the choice and ownership that you can provide students?
Yeah, well, I think it's trying to deal with the world as it is, and we talk about that in organizing, and William Obama, based on his organizing experiences, uses the same frame of the world as it is, as opposed to the world that we would like it to be. That if we have to recognize that there's that tension, and in the world as it is, recognize, at least from my perspective, is trying to figure out how much control students can realistically have in our classroom, and also be able to move forward, and also recognizing some of the other challenges, personal and behavioral challenges, that our students face. When we talk about choice and ownership, one of the things that I always think about is it was a famous experiment by Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, I think that's how it's pronounced, where people are more motivated when they have more control over their environment. In his experiment, which has been repeated a zillion times, half the participants in the lottery were given random numbers, and the other half were given pieces of paper, and they could write whatever numbers they wanted. And the researchers offered to buy the tickets, and they found that the people who wrote their own numbers, that they had to pay them 5 times what they had to pay those who were given numbers. So like in other words, they found the ability to choose for ourselves makes us 5 times more committed to the outcome than if somebody chooses for us. So, exploring, different homework alternatives and assignments, inviting students to be involved in the decision in the seating arrangements, talking, getting their input on consequences for misbehavior. All those are very realistic, and relatively easy ways for us to give students choice, and genuine choice. And I remember reading a story in horror about, in a book about a teacher who was saying, giving students a choice on which side, giving a blank sheet of paper, and they could decide which side of the paper they wanted to write their answers to. Right? I mean, we're talking about a genuine choice, not fake choices.
Yeah, interesting. There's a whole movement toward, and it's not new necessarily, but towards democratic schools where the students actually participate in the decision-making. There's a similar movement in the prison world. Knowing that you're dealing with what actually exists, is there a part of you that wishes there could be more of that kind of actual choice in decision-making?
Well, I think, I think clearly that would be a great situation to be in. Realistically, at least with the students that I work with, that's down the road, so to speak. I mean, but certainly we have had classes where students have been involved in helping to identify better menus that are served for food that's served in the cafeteria, for working on real-world issues like organizing a community meeting for job training providers in the neighborhood. Clearly the more power that students can have, the better, assuming that they are in a good position to use it, and that they have good judgment to do that. And certainly, I'm sure in some schools that probably students are further along the road to that. And maybe, as students get older, I think, I could see that happening. I think for a lot of our students, their lives are so totally out of control outside of school that they and their families have so little power in what's going to happen. I mean, they don't even sort of even know where they're going to sleep that night. That, having them just, involved in deciding what kind of homework to do is a good first step for developing a sense of power. But certainly, ideally, the more students that are integrated in decision-making in the school, the better. Because the more power that people have, sometimes people view power as a finite pie. That if you get some, that means I have less. Where in fact, the more the power is spread around, the bigger the whole pie gets, the bigger the number of possibilities.
Let's move to the last chapter, just because I want to make sure we have time to talk about it. There are other things that I hope we can get to, and if not, that's okay. But this chapter, this is the one, how do you best prepare students for standardized tests while doing no harm to them? This actually kind of took me by surprise, right? Because the common kind of progressive refrain would be, if you teach kids to be truly interested, then that will be reflected on their doing well in the test. But you took an approach that both, it surprised me, kind of delighted me, and then sort of left me wondering. Right? There were a number of ways in which you could show the students how to prepare that relate to the more ambiguous nature of test taking. Right? Do you want to describe what those are?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think, there are a number of things that I think teachers can do to help students prepare for a test that they can use in other high-stress situations in their lives.
ranging from 10 minutes before they have to take the standardized test, having students write about a successful ancestor of theirs. I mean, research has shown that students writing about a successful ancestor and then talking to a neighbor about it for a few minutes helps students develop a greater sense of motivation, because most test-taking research has shown that in addition to what you were saying, that yes, just teaching the lessons, teaching meaningful lessons, is the most important thing you can do for students to do well on tests. So that is accurate. But the next biggest percentage is student motivation, is how motivated are students to perform well, to do their best. And the reality of it is, these are high stakes for all of us, and if students can develop skills, or knowledge about how to be focused in a high-stakes situation that they can also apply prior to a job interview in the future, prior to other high-stakes situations, and it takes a few minutes, for me, well, I figure, why not? Including, trying to have students take the test in a place that they're familiar with. I mean, our administration organizes it so that students take, for their English test, they're actually with their English teacher in the same English classroom. And then this idea of being test-wise, that, again, plenty of research has also shown that the key is to not spend weeks on test prep, but, spend a handful of class, if you're going to do it, spend a handful of class periods on it.
And doing it in the generative way that you've described, right? This is a way that could help you in the future. There's the ancestor one was just brilliant for me. The writing about a personal successful experience, successful personal experience. Then you had one that was 10 minutes talking. I love that.
Yes. Yeah, research says just getting people talking about a topic of interest to them, to a neighbor, the research shows it gets the brain, it sort of activates the brain and gets people, a little, just a little more on. I mean, these are the kind of things that I think are ethical. One of the challenges is that if you are just totally focused on test prep and more test prep, would students potentially have a higher test gain? And what research shows is that, oftentimes that's possible. But just last year, actually earlier this year, last year, this is in the book, this big study came out and showed that yes, even though there may be an immediate slight bump, over the long term, student achievement deteriorates. So it may get it'll get the bump, but then it'll go lower after that. You go to bump, but it'll go lower after that. That it does serve for cross purposes or for long-term academic achievement. And I just don't think that that's ethical, even though it actually might bump up the numbers a little bit more.
So John Hattie came on the show, and you reference him in the book, so I know you know who he is. He did the meta-study of meta-studies. And I think it was John who talked about helping students think about assessments in terms of measuring their own ability to learn, and actually having their learning how to learn be the focus of their actual education. Does that resonate with you? Is that a way that you've looked to assessments with your own students?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think in the book, have a major lesson on helping students develop metacognition. I mean, what the OECD, if I forget what that acronym stands for, the They come out with the big, is it OCD? Yeah, the international body that comes out with the international test scores every year, the PISA tests. They've identified, for example, metacognition as the key element in student achievement, and helping students recognize this idea of metacognition and thinking about their thinking and being conscious about it and assessing themselves on when they're doing it is really, I think, really important. Because, I mean, the reality of it is that we teachers aren't going to be around them a whole lot of times. And we want students to be able to see it in their self-interest, to be thinking about their thinking when we're not around. When they're not even going to be, they're going to get graded on their metacognitive awareness. That they're not going to be called upon to explain why they're doing what they're doing. They just they realize that it's in their long-term self-interest to achieve their goals, to be doing these kind of things, to be looking at, well, what is the best way for me to learn? Do I tend to, if I reread the paragraph, does that work for me? Is it better for me to maybe take a minute and summarize the chapter in one sentence? How few words can I highlight in this passage that really show me what the important elements are, so when I come back to have to study, I only have to look at those instead of reading the whole page. But students need to see it in their self-interest to do this. And when you get, and having videos of people like LeBron James or other Olympic athletes talking about, how they use reflection, how they use metacognition. And the bottom line is that can be pretty powerful. Or when you have Michael Jordan talking about, that the reason for his success is because of all the mistakes he made and the willingness to take the risk. That kind of stuff can help.
Every lesson you have in the book, I think, exemplifies this whole concept of metacognition. And I've been calling it generativity, but I think it's a part of this interest in having the students become aware of their own learning how to learn. And certainly those of us who are adults have developed all kinds of strategies. I never read a book straight through. Right? Mm-hmm. I read the introduction, I read the conclusion, I pick up chapters that I like. I treat it like a conversation, mm-hmm. so that I will stay motivated and interested. But a lot of our models for education are sort of sequential recipes. And you talk about flow as one of your new, as one of the new strategies. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me that the original story, I think, of flow was that Csikszentmihalyi, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but that he watched artists, right, and then asked them questions afterwards about the processes they had gone through. Mm-hmm. And if there's ever a group of people who are going to have different ways of approaching something, right, who are going to have different methodologies, who will have cycles of productivity or will learn to walk away, it would seem like those are artists. Mm-hmm. And do you think that, well, I guess I don't know how to form that question necessarily, but in terms of students becoming sort of aware of their strategies, is that your ultimate hope?
Well, yes, and I think also having students learn what researchers have found to be successful strategies for many others, and for them to try them out and determine which ones work best for them and which other ones might work best, but might work even better. And for teachers to model that, and for students to constantly be reassessing what works and to testing it out. Yeah, I mean, I think all that is, comes together. But I think introducing, again, coming from my organizing perspective is, we talked about, the romanticized version of community organizing is that everything emanates from the people, right? And organizers just sort of move that along. But the reality of it is, no, because people, they've got lots of other challenges about family and work and stuff, and organizers are doing this full time, just as teachers are teaching full time. So we got to come up with these ideas, share with them, share this with students, have students then give them the opportunity to make it their own and to adapt it, to change it, and to get them to react to it. And I think the key is inviting the reaction, acknowledging the reaction, and celebrating the reaction. And that's why in terms of teaching, I think, Marzano did this big report last year on this meta-analysis and identified that assisted discovery learning is much more effective most of the time than direct instruction. Where, in assisted discovery, a lot of, it's what I was talking about, where you put some ideas out there. One of my big favorite lessons is inductive learning. As opposed, inductive learning, where you give students lots of examples, and the students have to develop the concept or the rule out of the example, as opposed to deductive, where you tell students, this is the rule, this is the concept, here are a bunch of examples. This idea of inductive, I think, is much more effective in helping students develop this sense of ownership around their learning.
So Larry, I want to posit that what you describe in this book and in the previous one, in the body of your work, is a counterpoint to the idea of efficiency in learning, the sort of the new learning machine, the sort of big data feedback that is described by many as computer-assisted personalization, which will take only a few teachers with many, many more students. That's my perception, but I'm interested in whether or not you feel like that's accurate. This feels like really hard human work that makes a huge difference in the lives of students. The other feels like an attempt to create a system for content assimilation. Again, am I just oversimplifying, or is that actually a reasonable way to look at the two philosophies?
Yeah, yes, I think it's probably somewhat simplification, but I think it's basically accurate. I think I think what I'm talking about is really what personalized learning is, as opposed to how it is typically discussed in terms of machine learning. So I'm not against data. I'm all for the idea of being data informed, not being data driven, and recognizing that data there's a broad definition of what data is. Data is just not numbers. Though I'm open to learn. I've learned stuff from numbers. I look at student test scores. I look at student standardized test scores. And sometimes I view it as useful, and sometimes not. But I also view data as what's going on in my students' lives, and their families, and the challenges that they're facing. And if if they are, how many if the quality of their questions, are they using the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, or are they using the lower levels? Are they being relational? Is this person actually helping their partner learn on something that they don't know? That's all data. I don't think it's not necessarily measurable by a standardized test.
So we'll take a few minutes here for Q&A. We've got about 6 minutes left. If you have a question for Larry, you can either put it in the chat or you can raise your virtual hand. In the participant box, you'll see some icons. The third one over is a hand, and you can raise your hand if you want to ask Lorie a question, or feel free to put it in the chat.
And also, just so people know, I mean, if you go to my blog and you click on the book cover of Self-Driven Learning, it'll lead you to tons of excerpts from it and free lesson plans and a bunch of other info on it.
Lorie, a number of people have used the phrase self-directed learning. Mm-hmm. You call this self-driven learning. What's the distinction for you?
Oh, I don't know if it's more than semantics. I couldn't tell you. I mean, I have seen the expressions, the phrase self-directed. You know, I couldn't actually say specifically what that is, if it's any different from self-driven. You know, it's self-driven is the phrase that the publisher and I came up with. You know, so to build on this whole concept of developing intrinsic motivation. Are you familiar? Is anybody on the chat room more familiar with how this idea of self-directed learning is used?
Well, I had I'm forgetting his name on the show, who wrote a very well-known book on self-directed learning, and it was actually much more the kind of independent direction. And I didn't know if you were purposefully avoiding that term because of the independence involved. It doesn't sound like it.
No, but I mean, it's probably a good reason not to call it self-directed. I mean, I think you know, this idea is it's about developing, you know, helping students want to pursue things independently, but recognizing that, you know, a lot of our students aren't there yet. You know, need to be encouraged to do that. I mean, I think that's like the whole thing with the flipped classroom idea. I think for a lot of highly motivated students, I mean, I'm sure that works well. I think for many of our other students, it will not.
So Bob wants to know, what's your advice for getting parents to recognize that the children are in an authoritarian class when authoritative would better serve the students?
Well, I think it's actually quite interesting. I've been getting a fair number of emails from parents asking about what they should do, you know, about their teachers who are being more authoritarian. And I had a close friend in a similar situation, and I just would just recommend to give them the summary of the studies on it. There's a link in it in the book, and I'm sure if you just search authoritarian on my blog, it'll lead you to a blog post where you can just get a one-page summary of that. And if you've got a relationship with a teacher, have them look at it. You know, or have parents look at that and think about, you know, have them talk to their students about it. That's what I've recommended to people.
We probably have time for one more question. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat, or if you would like, you can raise your virtual hand and we'll give you the microphone. Bob's sort of following
up. Yeah, well,
I
see, Bob. Yeah, well, I've certainly had that experience. I mean, where parents have said, told me with their student, you know, when they're challenged with their children, just be harsher because it worked for them. And I mean, I think, again, in terms of dealing with parents, leading with the ears instead of the mouth is the key thing. I mean, I think you can't lead with a explanation about this, but you can lead with the teacher, with a discussion about what's going on with, you know, with their family, what is their dream and vision for their child, what's their vision for their family. I mean, listen and develop a relationship and develop a sense of trust. Unfortunately, for so many parents, the only time they hear from us is when there's a problem about their student, which is, you know, and that is not the best time
to help parents be open to thinking in a different way.
I love that answer. Larry, I don't want to ignore this question, but it's the last one, and feel free to just give a 30-second answer. Jean wants to know if you've considered lessons around locus of control. So many at-risk kids seem not to see a connection between their activity and their future.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think a whole lot of the lessons in both of my books are related to that. I mean, it's all designed to help students see that, questioning what they're doing now going to help get them where they want to go, ranging whether it's the famous marshmallow experiment, and students seeing how a lack of self-control leads to not being successful, and self-control can lead to being successful, to one of the lessons in the new book, and you can find some information in my blog I read about it, is all the lessons around bullying, all the information about bullying primarily focuses on the negative impact it has on the person being bullied, which makes a lot of sense. But recently there's been some research on the negative aspect it has on the bullier, the person being the bully, and how the long-term negative impact on them is, I think that is a different way of looking at it. And just as in rudeness, in this book, there's a lesson on rudeness, looking at what is the negative impact on the people being rude, how they are looked at in a negative way, how they have fewer friends, how they get fewer grades. That looking at it from that perspective is really key.
Larry, thanks so much. As usual, really delightful, and so appreciate your voice and the work that you do.
Thank you for having me. And of course, people can easily get a hold of me if they have comments or suggestions for other lessons or ideas. Always open to hearing that, either contact form on my blog or Twitter or any of the other myriad ways I am on social media. Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun. This is a good way for me to help get energy to cross the finish line tomorrow on the last day of school.
Have a great day tomorrow.
No instinct for me this time. Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Don't miss, in July, Matt Hearn will start us back up again after a short break. Then Will Richardson and Don Winkle. Thanks to Larry. Thanks to all of you for attending. Take care now, and bye.